Hi, my name is John McMaster here in my Silicon Valley garage.
Hi, I'm Dmitry here in my Silicon Valley living room.
So tell us a little bit about these pricer tags.
So there are three companies that make electronic price tags. They're kind of owning most of the market. And this is from one of the company called Pricer. They're interesting in that they're the only ones who are not using wireless radio. They're actually using infrared. So you can actually see there's an infrared pin diode in here for receiving and an LED for transmitting. So part of the protocol for these has been documented by one gentleman in France who documented and then was forced to take it down. But the actual chip these things run is not known. It's not a normal chip of any sort. And opening this device, you can actually see the chip is very custom. It's got the company name on it. So given that companies that make price tags don't usually make their own chips, given that those two things don't generally cross, the question came up as to what the hell this chip was, which is when I removed at least this one and gave it to John to decap.
Sure. Maybe this is a good point. I can actually bring up that on my screen just to give a little bit of background there. So give me a second. I will bring that up. Now, as a fun bit of trivia, this was actually the first thing imaged with my new microscope setup. So I'm going to share.
So what you're saying is entirely wrong.
Okay, so you can see this guy here. Well, this is why it's called test one if you look up here, because this was literally the first thing imaged. Now, as a side note, actually there was some settings issues on the microscope, and I actually could have captured this at much higher resolution as a side note, but that's fine. Anyways, yeah, so you can see here's the same logo that we saw on that chip there, which I think you also had on your board there, right? Same chip?
Yes, and that's terrifying. Once again, you don't expect companies making price tags to be making their own chips. This is just completely weird.
But you did a little digging, didn't you? And you kind of got an idea of what the ecosystem thing was there?
Yes. So basically, the reason they have their own chip is their IR interface requires really fast reaction time. It's a 1.25 megahertz fast IR. So my guess is they needed some custom logic to handle that, the I/O for that. So they went to this company called Solomon, which is the logo you're seeing there, who makes custom ICs for people, and just asked them to do this, to make this chip for them. These tags are the second generation of this chip. The first ones were actually a chip on board. It was literally one of those black epoxy blobs. But they were also they were imaged previously by the gentleman in France, and they also had the Solomon Systech logo on them. And basically, they've been doing this for at least 2 generations, but no one really knows what these chips have in them.
And so I can also maybe give a little background about what we were originally trying to do and some of the changes there. Originally, we thought that man, I wish I could get some better lighting on here. We thought that there might be a mask ROM in there, right? And so one of the proposals was that I was going to, let me see if I can move maybe somewhere where there's better light. One of the proposals was that I would try to maybe open this chip up. Oh, did you lose me? There we go.
Nope.
One of the proposals was that I would actually try to decap this chip and maybe do some processing to get list the main firmware out. But do you want to talk a little bit about why you don't believe there's at least like a big firmware blob in there anymore?
Yeah. So it looks like in order to save money, these devices don't have flash because flash requires a different process entirely to make. So it's cheaper to make chips without flash. Apparently, there's also licensing fees and patents. But also, it looks like these chips, just like the first generation chips Pricer made, are mostly RAM-based. So if you look at the initial die image, you can see a lot of very repetitive patterns in the top left of the die, taking up about half of it by area. And that's actually all RAM.
Do you want me to bring that back up? Would that be useful?
Yeah.
Sure. So let me get that back up while you discuss that.
So it's basically all RAM. And actually, you can tell this apart by just taking one of these tags and talking to it over infrared and verifying that it works. Then you can power it off and back on, and it doesn't come back. It just blinks an LED in a pattern that I think indicates the internal ROM bootloader is ready. Now, this also meshes pretty well with how this thing works. So if you look at the actual board, there's these areas here. So there's one here. So a battery compartment slides into here. Here's another one here, another battery. And this is another fun area. here. So if you look here, this is the standard 2 contacts for the battery and also a few extras. So the idea here is clearly this is the debugging interface. So instead of the battery compartment sliding in here, a debug cable of some sort slides in for development. So as far as I can tell, this is for development at Pricer Company. They slide in a replacement for the battery cartridge, which provides power on these 2 interfaces and the debug. And then these pins here are for factory programming as well. Now, these tags are sealed with batteries inside, and they're given to customers. When they run out of battery, they're returned for recycling to Pricer, and they give you new ones. Most likely, recycling is just replacing the battery cartridges with new ones. And the battery cartridges are designed such that if you attempt to pull it out yourself, they will break and damage the PCB, and that's how they make sure that you actually keep paying them, I suppose.
If it breaks it when it pulls it out, though, how do you recycle it and just replace it normally?
I don't think they recycle it. I think they replace the battery cartridges. If you first open the back of the device, then you can take the battery cartridges out. If you don't open the device, the battery cartridges are removable. There's a pin you can click, the little door pops open, you can pull it out. But they have the contacts they have are aimed in such a way that if you pull it out, they bend backwards and scratch traces off the PCB. Nice. I'm not sure if it's on purpose or a happy coincidence, but it's pretty clear that if you actually attempt this, they're not meant to be customer battery replaced.
Sure. So I think as we have it now, we have basically 2 objectives, right? One of them is you wanted to see if you could directly get the firmware out of the device by very carefully opening it. Is that correct?
Yes, and then until I realized that the minute I opened it, there was no firmware left.
But with a Dremel or something like that, you should be able to work around that, right?
If I figure out what the protocol is to talk to this ROM bootloader that's in there, or the stock firmware that's in there. So the second idea we had is there is a ROM bootloader in the chip, in mask ROM or some other kind of ROM. It's not flash. So the idea is if we can possibly recover that, we might be able to ask it for the firmware as well, which is, I guess, what we're trying today.
Yeah, so my thought was that I could be working on that. And I'm just going to make a quick attempt. Maybe we'll find something, maybe not. I've kind of streamlined things a bit here too, just to give kind of a quick overview. I don't know what you can see. Hopefully you can see
the big lab.
There's a microscope here. And then this big old mess of wires over here is my chip etching machine. I should also add there's a rev of that's less messy, but that is not deployed yet. So I was thinking I would try to extract the firmware there, maybe by brute force, the mask ROM, and in parallel, you could go over maybe some of the things you've learned there or new things you're trying on the firmware and the chip, and just kind of see if maybe people have ideas there. Sound good? Sure. And maybe just real quick, just to show, I'm going to bring up, because I have the actual chip over here, I'm going to bring up a little microscope viewer. And let's share this. Okay. Anyways, so you can see under the microscope here, we have the actual chip. Just wanted to show it before I kind of tear it down. There's the real chip there. And with that, I'm going to start going through the process. A little out of focus there. I think that's the best I can do right now. So anyways, if you want to collect any last data before I slice it up, this is last call here.
No, let's slice it.
Okay. All right. So what I'm going to do then is I have basically a hot plate over here. I'm going to turn this on. And I'm going to start mounting it for use on the chip etching machine. Typically what I do is I take these little Teflon paddles and I use a very small amount of wax to fix the chip on there. And this allows me to then, it's maybe a little hard to see here, but this is basically oops, can't see your screen. It just tabbed. There you go. If you can see here, maybe. Yeah, here you go. You can see this is basically the etch chamber. So chemicals are fed through different process tanks here, go into chamber here. And if you're really lucky, there's a microscope here. Unfortunately, if you saw my tweet a while back about this really funky USB connector, it's like this weird thing. I don't know if you've seen these. it's this terrible USB connector. It's horrifically unreliable. I actually ordered a USB connector. I'm going to try to strip this out and maybe try to put a standard one on here. But anyways, it's quite unreliable as a result of using this connector. But if we're lucky, we'll actually be able to see it etched live, which is kind of fun when that works. So with that, I'm going to start preparing the chip. And maybe in the meantime, then, you can talk a little bit about what you've learned so far about the firmware. Sound good?
Yep. Can I share my screen?
Let me make sure you can do screen sharing. Yep, you should be good to go now.
Okay, let's try this. Here we go.
Oh,
So,
by the way, real quick, how is the background noise from my fan? Is that causing issue?
I can barely hear it.
Okay, I'll leave it alone then.
Just barely. Okay, so the other thing is these things are supposed to be firmware updatable. And in one of these devices, we found the beginnings of the firmware, the shreds of it, the first 512 bytes. Been looking at this for a while, been breaking my head over this. And so far, I have no ideas. But, well, this is it. But if you look, it's clearly got a repetitive pattern, like you would expect out of any sort of firmware, a vector table of some sort. So here's a row of 13s and 13s and 13s here. So most likely it is some sort of vector table for some sort of microcontroller. But the spacing is 5 bytes, which doesn't match any controller I've ever heard of, which is just strange. So then I tried to see if I can find some other strides that work. And it turns out that, yes. In fact, if you consider that this is 10 bits instead of 8 in a row, it seems to actually work. Let me see if I can unshare my screen. How do I unshare my screen? Let's see here. Oh, here it is. I will attempt to. How do I do this? I can't seem to be able to unshare my screen. Oh, here it is. Okay, let me see if I can find the notes I have for this. Here's the other thing that we have. So the other thing we have is this, which is all we know about the protocol for these devices that has currently been reverse engineered. And this is by a couple of people, starting with a gentleman in France and a few others who have since tried. And each device has a 4-byte unique ID, which is derived from the serial number written on the back of it. And it can flash an LED to get attention of a customer passing by. They make these in segment and image versions. The segment ones just like have 7-segment displays. The image ones have full, complete images like these e-ink ones that we're interested in. And as you see, there's a lot of protocol space. All packets are pretty large. And you'll see that commands are actually at least 1 byte. And there's a pretty big space between known commands. 6, 34, BA, AB, 97. So clearly there's more commands here somewhere because there's nobody would pick these kind of random numbers. But we don't actually know what they are. Sending random commands to this thing is really difficult because it's difficult to figure out what it's doing, if anything. So one of the reasons I opened one is to see if I could solder some wires up to the SPI squared or SPI EPROMs that they have, and see if I can observe them doing accesses to see if I can somehow correlate my commands to what's being done. Unfortunately, as we learned, once you open these things and cut power, you can no longer actually do anything with them because they no longer run the stock firmware, so they just blink at you. So the next plan is to try to open one, like John mentioned, without cutting power to it. But let's see if I can find when I sliced the thing into 10-bit pieces. I have somewhere here a copy of that. Let's see if I can find it. And then I can try to show you. If not, I'll just have to slice it all over again.
Then maybe, oh, you got it?
I'm trying to find it. It's here somewhere. Yeah, here we go. You just go ahead and build it.
Maybe I can I'm going to stop you sharing real quick if I can. I'm going to show something over here.
Okay. Yeah, here we go.
Just real quick. So I'm going to disable real quick if I can. Or can I force you out? Or can you stop screen sharing real quick?
I'll just cancel it myself. Give me just a second. There you go.
So what I've done now is this chip has now been wax mounted. And this will allow me to put it into an etch chamber without the process chemicals washing it away as I etch it. So that's all. And so that's going to start going into the machine now.
How long does it take to get through each layer of metal?
So a chip like this, I did the Skywater chips recently, which second, the video is freezing for me, so I'm going to halt just a second. Back now. I did the Skywater chips recently, which I really should have announced, but they are up if people want to take a look at them. Those ones etched really, really quick. I'm going to say the whole chip got like 3 minutes of etch time, something like that, and it went through the whole thing. So quite aggressive. I think for this then, I'm going to do something very brief, like maybe 30 seconds of acid to start with and just kind of see how that goes. And just do it very incrementally. Because I have the microscope right next to the etch setup, I should be able to bring it back and forth and just kind of see how it goes. The main question is, sometimes I use a so-called barrier etch solution, which helps with some of the more difficult to etch parts of the chip. But that also attacks a lot of other things really aggressively, such as the mounting wax. And I haven't quite figured out how to use that well in my etch process. So probably just going to use straight hydrochloric acid, maybe with something to etch the metal to get that out of the way, and then go back and forth a bit.
Cool. Let's try it. All right.
Now, as a side note, the etch machine has also been a bit unreliable recently, so you may hear me cuss and swear a little bit. We may lose our G rating for this channel.
As long as it helps. So here is the firmware grouped into groups of 10 bits. And now it is pretty clear that there are patterns in here, and they're pretty evident here. And now we can see that there are many very, very similar groupings. Like, for example, here is this 323. So if we imagine that 323 is some sort of a jump instruction, and we break on them, suddenly we do indeed see something that looks like a vector table. Okay, so there we go. So if we imagine that 323 is the jump instruction, we have ourselves a vector table here with 4 of these 10-bit instructions in there. The one problem that we face right away is there is no architecture I can find that has 10-bit instructions. But if we put that aside for just a second, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30. So we have 30 what looks like vectors here. If we assume that maybe 3 anything is a jump, that's 31, and this is probably the reset vector. 32 total is, once again, something a microcontroller would do. So this is pretty believable to be some sort of an instruction set of some variety. And the question is what? What instruction set, what variety? So if we assume 3 is a jump, then what are the rest of these instructions doing here? Normally in a vector table, you would expect that you'd have a jump and maybe a no-op, or maybe some sort of a push and a jump and a pop and a return. And some of these do end in things like 2F7 or 2 something or other. So maybe those are returns, or maybe those are no-ops. But normally you'd expect a compiler to emit the same kind of no-ops, so probably not. The only other option is this whole thing is a branch, but 40 bits for branch instruction seems a little bit extreme. So I don't really know what more we can make of this. One suggestion I had was that perhaps this is an instruction thing set similar to something like zap, where first you have an instruction that loads some sort of an extension register, and then you have another instruction that uses that as a high bit of an immediate. So then, for example, that could be something similar. Sorry, I was just firing some comments here. Yes, and I already tried sorting and uniquing them. In fact, my tool here already does this. Let me see if I can show this. I didn't just pick 10 bits randomly, in fact. I, in fact, wrote a tool that tried a number of combinations. Let me show you. Here it is. So I actually wrote this tool here that, in fact, attempted every possible combination from 9 bits and up, and a number of bytes skipped to see how many common such groupings could be found. And the winner, in fact, was 10 bits with 0 bits skipped. So with that combination, there were 38 instances of 323, 15 of 06, 15 of 6F, and so on. And I sorted these and found the top one for how many total groupings the top 10 would account for. And here it's 113. So basically, it's pretty likely that the groupings here are 10-bit, whatever they mean. The other thing my tool does is search for common digraphs. And I guess the common ones are 323.06 and 06.6F. So what that means is very commonly we do have things like 323.06.6F happening. But unfortunately, this does not map to any architecture that I've ever seen of or heard of. So that's why we are here today, hopefully to find something else. And yes, 8051 would have been the very first and the very obvious guess, but unfortunately it does not look like it. This does not look like 8051 instructions, because then I'd expect to see 2s for jumps, and we don't actually see any bytes that are 2s if you look at the actual binary. So I don't actually know. So the reason we're here today is because I have a lot of ideas here. I haven't posted this as a challenge on my website and on Reddit, and even in the chat for the Unnamed Reverse Engineering podcast, but so far no one's come up with any clever ideas for what it could be. But I don't think, so I see a comment here that asks whether it could be mission critical to be tamper-proof, and I really don't think so, because the other two competitors of theirs, which is Price Data and Solum, they do nothing of the sort, and they seem to have no trouble competing in the marketplace. Their devices have been insanely easy to reverse engineer, and I've had absolutely no trouble turning them into picture frames and temperature measuring devices and whatnot. So I don't think it's really a tamper evidence thing. I think it's more of the sort that they really did make something custom. It's terrifying, weird, and unexpected, but it really looks like it. At first, I didn't even think they'd have a custom chip. When I first gave this chip to John, I told him that most likely it's just a relabeled something or other. And once we see the markings on silicon, we'll know what it is, and that'll be the end of this saga. Yep. It was only after we found out later that it is, in fact, a custom chip that all this became weirder. And the more we look at it, the weirder it gets. How goes the removal of metals?
I was trying to get the webcam feed up to show to you, but it's being grumpy. So I don't have that up yet. Maybe I could fiddle with this with just a moment more. And if that doesn't work, then I'll just go ahead and etch it. And we may not get our live stream of that, which would have been nice. So let me fiddle.
Can you occasionally remove it to show it off?
Well, it was just fun. In theory, I could actually get you a chamber view, which would have been kind of fun. Oh, here we go. Okay, it's working right now. So maybe.
Well, go breathe at it. Let's see.
Well, the problem is the machine shakes around, so That's where part of the issue is. But you know what? I've got it mostly in view right now. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to try sharing screen. And, you know, there's a lot of things that can go wrong, but you never know. Pray to the gods. Maybe it'll work. Okay, so you can see this right here. So that is a live view in the etch chamber. What's going to happen is I'm going to attempt to start it. Like I said, there's some serial port reliability issue right now, so I may swear at this. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to attempt to tell it to basically etch with hydrofluoric acid for basically a minute. And then I'm going to tell it to basically do a metal etch cycle for a bit too. And that's basically going to be maybe hydrochloric acid and or hydrogen peroxide.
This looks much more colorful than the previous shots.
It looks more what?
Colorful than the previous shots.
Oh, that's because the other shots are taken with epi illumination, and this one is taken with, I guess you'd say, like oblique illumination. Because of this, you've got a lot of different angles on the oxide, and it gives you a lot more rainbowy sort of patterns. I would say if you're going for what's that?
So it's not actually meaningful, just pretty.
It's pretty. It's not meaningful. And so typically, if you want to take dye photos for artistic merit, you won't use epi illumination because it doesn't look as nice as a general rule.
Well, but we're not here for art. What happens?
But you know, you can enjoy it as it goes. So anyways, I'm going to fire this off, and I'm just going to shake this real quick, make sure, yep, you can see it's actually a live video. And let me see if I tell it go, if it will do it. So what it's doing now is it's going to try to wash the chip before starting it. It's just first draining out if there were any fluids that were in there. Now it's flooding some water in there, hopefully. It's not out of water yet. Some water going in. And yep. So that's hydrofluoric acid in there now. You can see it immediately started chomping away at the chip. See if I can focus this a little better. And if we're able to get a better view, but around the pad frame where there's kind of metal exposed, you can see it etching a lot more aggressively. Once though we eat through some of the oxide in the middle, you'll start seeing that getting etched as well. But since we only have metal exposed at the outside right now, as a general rule though, I try to avoid metal getting etched by the hydrofluoric acid because it tends to create side reactions with the substrate. And if you have transistors down there, especially like an Implant Rom, that tends to actually degrade them. But for something like this, where we've got just basically the top metal layers, it doesn't matter as much because none of the silicon substrate is exposed yet. But yeah, you can see some etching there. So I said, very short etch cycle. Now it's washing the chip. And it's going to ask me to, in a moment, put some, just manually add some acid to etch away the metal. There shouldn't be too much metal right now, but you'll see some of that metal on the outside getting attacked a little more vigorously. Okay, so far nothing has somehow broken, so that's a good start. I'm going to mix up some acid over here real quick. If you still hear me, I'm mixing up a little bit of hydrochloric acid and a little bit of hydrogen peroxide. Okay. And
don't forget the olive.
What's that?
Don't forget the olive.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm going to do is I've got the acid mixture ready now and for future. So I'm going to tell it enter now. It's going to drain the water out of it, and then I'm going to manually add the acid. So now I'm just pipetting in some very corrosive kind of metal etch. I don't know, it looks like the bubbles might have obscured it a bit there. So a little hard to see. Maybe I can blow that off if we're... I don't know if that makes it. That's a little better. It seems like the lighting maybe got hurt a little bit. A little harder to see now for some reason, but
maybe you etched the light bulb a little bit.
I mean, I wouldn't put that. I wouldn't take that off the table. I'm actually surprised the microscope is still working, to be honest, with all the fumes it gets exposed to. But it's like a very low cost one. So I was like, you know what? We'll see if this guy works for a little bit. And
well, most things don't attack glass. But then again, you have HF in there, and HF does.
Yeah, but I doubt this microscope has glass. Like it's a very low cost one. Look how aggressively that's going. Yeah, you can't really see anything now. You know, it's a very low cost one. I think it probably has plastic, which, you know, HF is not so aggressive towards. But yeah, you can see it etching away there. It's doing something. Definitely on the to-do list to get better adjustments on here as well, so I can more properly point at things. It's really crude right now. I basically just have a little piece of tubing I'm pushing back and forth to try to point it at the chip, and it's doing an okay job, not a great job. Anyways, that's going to sit there just another minute or so, and then it'll wash out. And we'll put it under the microscope to see if it looks better now.
I assume there'll be a message in there that says, "Nice try, guys."
Yeah. And also notice around the edge, you can see these pads here are still being etched. You see a little more bubbles coming up there. So that's actually where it's etching some of the metal out. Let's check, see anything. There's a question there about cores and more custom stuff. Did you see that question?
I did, in fact, check for that. All I found were a couple of classroom example cores from a couple of colleges, and I, in fact, checked for matches with those just in case. But yeah, that was not it either. And I also, even the Chinese companies love to knock off PIC chips. I checked for any PIC chips as matches, but PIC never went down to 10-bit instructions. They only went down as 12 and 13 and 14. So yeah, I don't think it's anything like that.
So I'm just taking it out now to inspect it. That's basically just like a minute or something, so not a lot in there. Let me get video feed back over here. All right, so I'm going to share screen. And okay, let's take a look. I don't expect too much at this point. Once again, I'm being a little conservative. And that looks roughly the same, I would say. Nothing too different yet. Let's poke around. This is one of those things where, though, when you only have one chip, you know, you just got to be a little more careful, because if you destroy it, you know, you're just kind of done at that point. Oops, what's going on there? Just gonna look. What we should see, though, which I'll point out, we didn't look at this carefully before, is it's not quite obvious. Trying to find an obvious place where you can see the metal being eaten. But nothing super obvious. But anyways, if we go here, and unfortunately my focus doesn't match this guy. If we can go down a bit more. There we go. If you look here, there used to be these pads here. It's a little bit hard to tell, but these have been etched out by the acid. This is kind of this residue that was here. So the little dots here, it's kind of like salt residue. So the acid has started to etch this out, but it hasn't gone super deep in here. Once we start removing some more of this oxide, though, you'll see this metal getting hit pretty hard. So I'm going to put it back in, and we'll see if we can etch it a little bit more.
But there's a really good view of the repetitive structure of the RAM there.
Did you want to check something out?
No, I was going to say it looks very pretty. You could see the repetitive structure of the RAM. Just repeated blocks upon blocks of RAM. Since the chip needs a lot of RAM to buffer downloaded data and all of its code and runtime stuff, it makes sense that it has a lot of it. Looks really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a little close-up of it if you're curious. Okay, I'm going to go put it back over and see if I can etch a bit more there. Oops, looks like my laptop is actually low. Give me just a second. That would be unfortunate.
The comment in the chat, we had mentioned that there is a 9-bit core that exists, and yeah, I just couldn't find any 10-bit ones. And the two that I found, not as open cores, but just as documented instruction sets, didn't match this stuff. So we were not getting anywhere with that. But these bytes are available on my website if you'd like to attempt to take a crack in them in some way that I haven't thought of. Here, I'll post a link even. I'm always happy for somebody to take a look at it. Let's see if I can. Here we go. Here's the link. Here you go. So that is the link to the to those exact bytes that you can take a look at. You can see them pretty printed. You can download the binary, whatever you'd like. And yes, so far the only comment is some gentleman saying that it looks like it's a load and a jump, which makes sense. It could be. But unfortunately, it doesn't match any instruction set still. So we're still pretty much nowhere.
Looking for that Rosetta Stone still. And that was one of the hopes, right, with the boot ROM is to give you a little bit more data to work with, right?
Yes. The idea is the boot ROM is required to be a complete runnable image all by itself. It has to at least be able to download more code. Whereas here, we're looking at the start of something, but we don't know much about it. Seeing the boot ROM was something that we're hoping would help quite a bit in figuring out what it does and how. Since we know its purpose, we don't know all the functionalities the code this thing normally runs has, so it's hard to reverse engineer it. We don't know the instruction set, we don't know what it does or why it does it. We know what the boot ROM does and why, and it's bound to be pretty small, so the hope is that that'll help a lot in figuring out what and how it is. Let's take a look.
Okay, I guess I will bring this back over here then. I think you can see a little display here. Okay, let's do, maybe I'll do a little bit longer. I'm going to do 2 minutes this time just to be a little more aggressive. And let's hit go. So once again, it's just doing some washing the chip right now, and then it'll put in acid in a second. Oh, there's the acid actually. Okay. So hopefully we'll see some bubbles in a bit. Looks like there's some junk in there. Yeah, you can see some of the, this looks like some hair or something gone in there, but you can see the hydrofluoric acid eating the pads there. And then once we start seeing actual etching in the center, that means that we've not only been etching the pads, but the you know, we've etched through the main oxide and are starting to hit the majority of the chip. I could focus that maybe. Got it. Oops. Guess that'll have to do. Dmitry, any comments while this runs? Oops.
Well, I was mostly just responding to the comments on the chat and sent to me privately. But there was a suggestion that this might be parity of some sort, and the actual use of it is not 10 bits. But there are lines that differ by only a single bit, so if it was parity, that wouldn't be the case.
Oh, okay.
And I posted a link
nice.
to the if somebody wants to try something I hadn't thought of.
Let's see.
I've been beating my brains against this for a number of weeks now, so I feel like anybody who has new ideas, I'm happy to hear them, no matter how crazy they are.
We also talked about the idea that this was data and not executable code.
It looks too much like executable code, and that's what we expect in the beginning of an update.
Okay, so I'm going to put in some basically hydrochloric acid, hydrogen peroxide once again to try to see if we can etch some more metal away.
By the way, John, it looks like your laptop is running out of battery. It started at 22, now it's down at 10.
No, it was down to 5. No, it was almost out. I plugged it in. we did almost lose it, but I did save it. It got pretty low. It should be going up now. Once again, though, here, I don't see any etching in the middle yet so much, or very little. The seed looks like maybe just a little bit.
Yeah, there's some bubbles there.
Yeah, a little bit, not too much. I think we're starting to poke through, but we haven't fully breached the oxide yet. We'll take a look at under the microscope in a second, and we'll see if it's any more interesting.
Without the camera, would this just be a case of try for a small period of time, take it out, take a look, lather, rinse, repeat?
Yeah, I mean, you can still kind of just tell by looking at it, how much it's bubbling. So you don't, strictly speaking, need the camera for this. But yeah, there's also just a lot of experience and just checking it, and yeah. Still a lot of guesswork. It also depends, how high quality of a result you want. I've kind of talked about this in the past, but if you don't really care about a lot of things, you just wanted a quick and dirty image of the bottom, you can use only hydrochloric acid. It just won't give you as high quality of a result.
Could you remove layers physically with something abrasive, like paper even?
You mean using an abrasive instead of chemicals?
I'm just curious, could that be done?
Yeah, so behind me, actually, I can show this. You would use something like this guy, if you can see this. So this is a high precision lapping machine. You basically mount a sample on this holder like this, and then you put more or less an abrasive on here, and you very slowly remove the layers from a chip. Something like this, especially in combination with chemical, is what a lot of these more professional shops use if you wanted to get all the layers of the chip. I'm not very good at that, though. I've tried it a few times. I need to do a lot more equipment tuning before I got something that I was really proud of to kind of advertise to people. It does take a lot of practice. for example, you have to do a lot to get all of the, like how much pressure you apply to things. The force is very important. Making sure you have kind of enough buffer to make sure that things wear evenly. A lot of fine points if you want to get an actually useful result from that. But in theory, that's something that I should have in-house here. Okay. Let's put this under a microscope again. It's blowing the water off of this when I do that. Let me get share screen again. And let's go back to this. It's got more of a pinkish tinge now, so I guess we've maybe etched off enough of the copper. Go in more here. Good focus. Maybe we've etched off enough of the oxide where the copper color is starting to come out more. I don't immediately see any really badly etched parts, but we can look around. Because we both agree that we saw some bubbles coming from the middle, right?
Yep.
Maybe not a torrent, but it was starting to etch in the middle. I'll look around, see if I can find something. Overall, though, all these.
Rom?
Well, we haven't really removed any layers yet. I think we need to get a bit lower down before we start doing. I do think the next etch cycle, though, is going to be a lot more dramatic because it does seem that we're pretty close. I think a 2-minute cadence is about right, at least right now. So why don't we do another 2 minutes? I think that'll take off a significant portion of the chip, but maybe not bring it down to the substrate. And then we'll see if that's a lot more interesting. Because
so you're saying this chip really won't work if I put it back on the board?
I think we're not past the point of no return, but yeah, you need to do some serious work at this point. Most practical purposes, I would say yes. This chip is not probably going to work again. I laugh though because I get sent a lot of chips that people think are toast, and they really, really want the data out of them. So my standard for never will work again may be different than your average person's. Okay. Just loaded it back in. And a bit of a wire there. All right, let's go at it again. Okay, so hydrochloric acid's back in there. See if I can adjust this again a bit nicer.
Much less bubbling this time. Oh, there it goes.
Yeah, I mean, it takes a second to start out, so.
Oh, that is nice focus. That is a beautiful image.
I'll have to set that as the thumbnail.
You should save this. This is wallpaper worthy.
Yeah? Sell it, fund my hopes and dreams.
Yeah. Mint it as an NFT and start selling it.
Oh, geez. You laugh, but people have suggested this before.
There's plenty of money to be made in momentum markets as long as you're not the last guy holding anything.
Yeah. If someone finds an NFT ASIC, though, send it in and I'll decap it. I do have a pile of Bitcoin ASICs here, which I did mean to decap, but I never got around to.
What do they do? Is it the mining stuff?
Yeah, like Butterfly Labs, stuff like that. I think part of it was that?
Wouldn't it just be boringly repetitive?
Probably. That's part of the reason why I haven't done it as much. It's like I've had some interest also in FPGAs, but unless you get into the more recent ones, they're not super exciting. I think we may do some more etching on this until we start seeing a lot of bubbling in the center. I think it needs more time. So I'm just going to tell it to do more hydrochloric acid. Give this another 2 minutes and see if we maybe see a little more etching in the middle. Like I said, it's a little unpredictable. Some chips go really quick, some take longer. Any questions while this is running? What do we got here? Just some people. Mike Brown is commenting about some chips that that Ryan got sent. Yeah, I'm cheating on Ryan a little bit right now. He was my chip YouTube buddy. Let's see. I don't know if Mike wants to talk a little bit about the chips that he sent Ryan, but I think it was just a handful of random mask ROM chips, and Ryan was hoping to go through and decap some and just see if he'd extract some of these ROMs just for fun and practice. Is that bubbling a bit more in the center, or is that just my imagination? Let's see if I can.
It doesn't look like there's anything in the center at all, actually.
It's just floating. Yeah, it could be. Maybe I'll do some of the hydrochloric acid then, and we'll see if we get some stronger reaction there.
What does this depend on? The process used?
The metals. So there's copper on here, and because I know, for example, the hydrofluoric acid will react well with aluminum. I'm not sure if it reacts that well with copper. It could just be a limitation there. Man, I really need to bolt this thing down a little better. Oops. It's being a little grumpy right now. Let me drain it. And I'm just going to put some of this stuff in. So this is now some of the hydrochloric acid mixture. Just going to try to clarify that a bit. Man, it's really
How many lists are you on since you started buying all these chemicals?
You know, probably my favorite one was man, I don't know if I'm on any list. Hard to say, but you know, some of these companies, at least in the U.S., the way that the law works is more or less the company assumes the liability for you for shipping it to you. So you can basically buy anything as long as you can convince someone to sell it to you. It's just that most companies don't want to accept the liability. Man, I feel that people get a little bit defensive, if I were to share, how I get some of these chemicals. But let's just say that sometimes you want to buy something, you may have to get creative to get it if you're having trouble getting proper channels to sell it to you. And I don't even mean like crazy chemicals, like nitric acid even. If you want to get, say, 65%, which is below a certain concentration that has some certain legal ramifications in terms of like shipping and stuff, you can get it pretty easily. But once you get to the higher concentrations, it's more liability basically for companies. So it's a little bit harder to get them to ship it to you, especially if you want to get them to ship it to you properly with right paperwork and stuff. And this is the reason why even a lot of times I would distill my own nitric acid, because I just didn't want to deal with the paperwork and stuff of getting it shipped to me properly. So yeah, I don't know. I've bought a lot of weird stuff, but I actually do have friends that have gotten on the no-fly list and stuff, and they've gotten on there for really stupid reasons. Best I can tell, it's pretty hit or miss why you get on these lists, why you get raided by the FBI. I don't know if I should be ashamed to say that I have a statistically significant number of friends that have been raided. I have almost been raided once, I would say. There was reason to believe that I might have gotten raided once. Once again, unrelated to anything I was doing. Just happened to be living with someone that was connected to someone who had some trouble with law enforcement. It's kind of a crapshoot from what I can tell. And obviously my opinion is like, I'm not doing anything super weird here, and even the people I know that have gotten in trouble weren't doing anything super weird. It's just you just get the wrong person's attention, and sometimes you get people up. But anyways, I'm going to drain this. I think we need to keep etching this though, so maybe I'll just do this manually. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to wash this. And I think we'll just let it sit with hydrochloric acid until it looks like it's really etching. Okay. So now this is not as part of an automatic sequence. I literally have to tell it to do anything right now. So this will just keep etching until it looks like it's doing something interesting. I'll just let it sit there. Maybe someone has any other comments or something while this is running. Let's see, talking about azeotropic, yeah. So more specifically about the 65%. If you're above 65%, you need to palletize it regardless of quantity for shipping. Something like 65, 68%, something in that region. So this makes it really expensive quickly. So, even if you bought, I don't know, in theory, 100 milliliters, you'd have to pay, let's say, a $400 hazmat pallet shipping charge. My idea for this, if I needed to buy some more, because I was getting a little bit low, was to just use a local supplier, so I wouldn't have to do long haul hazmat shipping. But yeah, regarding nitric acid on eBay, I don't know if I would have any comments about whether I might have bought some nitric acid off of eBay, especially if I wasn't entirely convinced the seller was not packing it correctly for hazmat. I do not recommend buying nitric acid in such conditions. But by coincidence, my nitric acid bottle did recently get refilled. Don't ask how that happened. Hopefully that answers your question there.
You just walk into a local supplier and just walk out with some, or do they have to ship it to you?
So once again, let's say so there's a local place. I think it's called Lab Pro or something that I was thinking about buying some stuff from. They most of these suppliers, they basically, if you have a employer identifier like an EID. So for example, I have an LLC for my consulting work. I think in theory, if I showed up, said, "Look, I'm a real company. Here's my EID. You know, put it on my corporate card. You know, it all kind of checked out. I think I could just pick it up locally, and I would basically accept the liability of transport after that. So I think that's not an issue for them is kind of my guess, as long as I looked like a reasonably, like they thought, oh, this guy's gonna use it for industrial use, he's not making explosives or, whatever they might be concerned with. Would you consider it worth the drive a source within, say, 200 miles? I think, geez, I don't know. Is this like, there's like a magical faucet of fuming nitric acid and I can go up to and just drink to my heart's content?
I think it's an offer.
Yeah, I have. I think I'm good right now, though. Like I said, I did fill up my bottle recently, and it takes a really long time. I would say that I maybe go through, I don't know, maybe half a liter a year, kind of at that cadence. I think I've got about maybe about a liter of fuming nitric acid here right now. So it's going to be a while before I run out again, I would say. No real hurry. The other problem I have is this is like my low grade fuming nitric acid. If you could see this here in the little corner. This stuff, is like, it's still pretty strong, but not strong enough that I like to use it for decapping. This is basically my waste acid bin. I haven't figured out what to do with this. This can get used sometimes for low grade decaps I don't care about as much. So even there's additional reserves if I really needed more acid that I could just tap into this as well. But thank you for the offer. Let's go back.
How's the chip looking?
What's that doing now?
Lots of bubbles.
There's a lot of bubbles. Does seem like a lot of bubbles, doesn't it? Do you think maybe we should take a look at it?
Try.
I'm just getting impatient at this point, and I'm just like, maybe we'll just etch it to something. But yeah, maybe we should stop here. So what I'm gonna do then is I'm gonna wash that.
Well, continuing along the topic of exciting surprises with the chip, maybe they use the metal we've never heard of for this. Maybe they're using gold. We're not going to etch it anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, you can see it's still etching there. You can see the bubbles in the corners. Let's give it some more. No, I think it's just more that maybe we hit barrier or something. I don't know. Like I said, there's this barrier etch step that I usually do. I can try doing it again. It's just, it caused a lot of problems I did in the past. So I wanted to experiment, maybe other techniques, not using it. But generally speaking, when I've had trouble etching a chip, it was because of barriers. Take this out. Oh yeah, it's definitely been etched now. So let's go over here. Maybe the camera feed stopped. Huh. I'll try replugging this. Make it happier. There we go. And I try to focus this down a bit. It's very slow reaction right now. Okay, do you see how that looks kind of like messed up now? Is the best way I can describe it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this stringy, that definitely means we've done some serious etching to the chip now. You're looking at a lot of the traces, they're just kind of haphazardly being thrown around. Definitely has etched now into the chip layers. Let's get an overview shot of that. It doesn't look too different from the overview, I would say. But definitely etching. I'm going to suggest then that we do maybe just poke around a little bit, see if we see something interesting. Oops, I can't see it again. And I'm going to try to adjust this camera to be in better focus. Let's see, does this let me do it? No. Okay, I'm just going to go around real quick, see if I see anything interesting, and then I'll put that up on the camera if I do. Maybe just the corner here. You can see a lot of the etching there, damaged metal. A lot of the pads are pretty badly degraded now. You can see this. These have a lot of damage to them now. Okay, I would say this is a good point to maybe do the more proper etch now. So I'm going to go back and do some of the metal etching step that I was skipping for a bit there, and maybe also start doing the barrier etch. I wouldn't say that we've revealed anything completely new yet, but now that we've gone through the main oxide and are coming to the lower layers now of the chip, we should start seeing changes a lot more rapidly now, which is good. That's interesting test patterns. I didn't notice this before, but I guess this right here. Is this Dmitry? This guy right here. I think this is actually a chip test pattern. Is that
5566?
Yeah, I don't know if it'll let me.
Yeah, you're there.
There we go. Does that look? Maybe it's not. A little hard to tell. Maybe it's just some random circuitry.
Well, there's a couple. There's capacitors in the middle there. A bunch of bigger ones on the right.
These ones?
Yeah.
Do you know what those might be used for? Oops.
No idea. I was just wondering that myself. I mean, I'd expect capacitors near flash, but we know there's no flash in here, so.
Right, but is it doing any of the RF stuff on die?
It does IR receive on here and IR transmit, but for transmit, I think there's pretty big transistors near the edges, and for receive, you probably need capacitors. So I don't know what they need giant capacitors for.
You don't think they need to like filter it to make like a sine wave or something like that?
No, it's all digital. It's infrared, and they sample it, and then just directly, basically, the data is there.
I see.
The way the data is sent is they send 2 bits at once. Mm-hmm. There is 40 pulses at 1.25 megahertz of IR, and then a pause of one of 4 lengths, which indicates which group of 2 bits you're sending, and then another set of 40 pulses of IR at 1.25 megahertz.
Yeah, and these are still mostly visible in this shot here, so it's nothing too new yet. So I'll put this up for discussion, and I will see if I can get this moving through the pipeline a bit while we discuss that.
Yeah, one of the suggestions here in the chat is that it could be a charge pump. And yeah, that's a possibility, but the question is what for?
Yeah.
This chip itself does not drive e-ink. E-ink is driven by its own controller of SPI. So you wouldn't expect to need high voltages here for e-ink. There's no flash here, so you wouldn't expect that. So it's actually interesting to see why there would be a charge pump in here.
So I just put it with hydrochloric acid and hydrogen peroxide. Looks like it's a little more aggressively etching it now.
Yep. So if you go back to the dye photo and go to the bottom left corner of it, you'll see the circuitry to drive the IR LED. Those 2 things on the left, those 2 pads, those were for the IR LED. Pins 1 and...
higher current, multiple bond wires.
Yep, those are for the IR LED.
Gotcha. Oops. What else do you know on here? Anything you can point out? So the RAM here, this is just random logic. So if there's like a CPU or something, I guess it would be over here.
Yeah, I would hope that would be it. Let me see. I have my notes. Let me see if I can find my notes here for what I know about this chip.
Any idea what this region is? I don't know what this pattern is. Right here.
Not really.
So yeah, it looks like it's slowed down etching aggressively in the middle. So I'm going to go change this out now for acid.
Yeah, so I have all my notes on this device. So we know that pin 1 and 2 go to the IR LED. So pins 3 and 4 only have an external capacitor connected between them. So maybe it is a charge pump of some sort. And this thing is powered by 3 volts.
Okay.
Okay. So pins 9, 10, 11, and 12 are all basically going to capacitors to ground. So there's quite some sort of supply.
Does that help?
Yeah. So that's the stuff across the bottom. All the logic, all the stuff that connects to the EPROMs and the display over SPI, that's all going to be pins, let's see here, 14 through 36. So basically the right and the top part are the logic. Everything on the left and bottom are power things that go to capacitors. Gotcha. 40 and 41 go to an oscillator, so you could try to look at those and see if you can find the oscillator in there somewhere. It's a 48-pin chip, so it should be somewhere in the middle of the left side.
So what I'm actually going to do right now is I'm going to prepare some more of the chemical solutions. This gets ready. Looks like it's taken another chunk out of it over there.
Okay, so I brought up the same.
Actually ran out of water. So put hydrochloric acid in there again. Try to etch out some of the metal. And then after this, I'm also going to do a barrier etch, which I think it may help with some of the things we're seeing now.
One of the questions in the chat was actually, what is a barrier?
Barrier is something that I'm not intimately familiar with, but I think it has to do with certain processes. Maybe if you have like copper or something like that, it can be cause some ill effects as part of the semiconductor stack up. So what they'll do is they'll put a layer like titanium nitride or something like that to basically just kind of keep things in place a little bit more. The problem is that titanium nitride does not dissolve very easily. And to deal with that then is I use a mix of ammonia and hydrogen peroxide, which can dissolve those a lot more readily. Otherwise, if you have like a sheet of it, for some example, even if you have hydrofluoric acid, even if you have this hydrochloric acid, you'll have a hard time etching through that sheet. Like you'll have to etch around it basically. So this significantly makes the process a lot more even by removing these special protective layers. Just gonna let this etch for a bit. I'm realizing though, if the off chance that this ROM is as a metal ROM, what I'm doing right now, etching away a lot of the metal, might be a bad idea, just as a side note. So I might back off at this, maybe if we do additional etch steps. Because it's removing quite a lot of metal right now.
Well, let's take a look and see what it even looks like after all this.
Yeah. I still think I should do the, so let me wash this. I'll do the barrier at least briefly. I want to see how it'll. You can see this also attacking a lot of stuff.
Yeah, I was going to say, is this barrier edge going to destroy the rest of the chip?
No, it's actually quite aggressive though. Like if you drop it on like plastic, for example, it'll attack plastic pretty aggressively. It's an interesting mixture because it's like it's things that, I mean, I don't know. My chemistry knowledge isn't very good. I wouldn't have guessed that this mixture is extremely corrosive, I guess is the best way that I can describe it.
Well, peroxide is no fun if it's concentrated.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I always thought of like peroxide being mixed with acids, I guess. It just didn't register that it can also be pretty terrible when you mix it with bases, I guess is another way to put it. But, you know, makes sense, I guess. I don't know. Peroxide's fun stuff. Oh, and this is 35%, by the way. So not like a watered down 3% hydrogen peroxide. Funnily enough, I actually buy this off of Amazon. It gets sold for food use, and it comes in a gallon jug. So, you know.
Well, 35% is not too bad. Try getting 90%. That would be interesting.
90% is actually not so bad. 90% is stable, at least. I think the fun stuff is like 50%, which is shock sensitive. It has this weird property, though, where like you go to like 90% and it's stable, but like 50% is not, or something weird like that.
Well, luckily, going from 90 to 50 is much easier than the other way around.
Yes. Wow. Okay, that looks significantly different now. So that will be interesting.
Let's look at it. It looks pretty beaten up. The area that was logic looks really beaten up.
That's okay. I mean, we at least want to see what's going on a little bit different, and you know, it's changed. Oops. So remember I mentioned that the that solution can attach the wax. So I just tried to blow it clean, and it knocked the dye off. Fortunately, I think it's right here. I haven't lost it. But yeah, it ate the wax off that was holding it on. All right. I'm going to maybe put some alcohol on it then to clean it up a little better. Okay. What do we got? go back over here. Well, it's definitely different. That's interesting. I don't think we had seen this power routing before. Oh, did this camera freeze again?
It's not frozen, it's just really out of focus.
I thought it wasn't. I don't know. It's at least updating really slowly. Let's try this again. Oh, maybe you're right. Maybe it's just...
There we go.
Okay, so here's the logic. Did we see this power routing before over here? I don't remember seeing that.
I don't believe
I see.
so.
It was just... I guess it was here. It was just a little bit deeper. It's a little deeper down.
It was hidden under all the other wires there.
Yeah, so we can definitely see that a lot more pronounced now. Maybe we can even go into that. Take a closer look.
Well, I guess we've confirmed that that's where the core is. Whatever it is, there it is.
I guess the question is, I can start seeing the standard cells. In fact, I think I could zoom into one of those. We could see it, which would be nice. Quick look. I still haven't... I mean, we could look around now because we have a better view. I'm going to enhance this quite a bit. Come on, behave. Okay.
There we go.
So now we're able to start seeing the actual logic on the chip, which is nice. Little bit hard to see with this setup, but those do look like the basic logic elements. Oh man, it's really sensitive to it. I can't touch the table or it completely wobbles out of focus. Like, little hard to tell exactly what these elements are, but those are standard cells that we're seeing now. Pretty big technology. Are relatively big, I'd say, for its age. Because when was this chip made? Is it a current product or pretty close to current?
Well, they still make them now, but they've been doing it for at least 8 years, I want to say.
Okay, so it is a bit older of a product. Maybe with an oil objective or something a little higher quality, maybe I could see those. Certainly on the other microscope where it's a little more level. And certainly with like a low quality SEM or a basic SEM, you should be able to see stuff. I'm going to poke around some more then and also see if I see something that resembles a boot ROM. I'm just poking around. Poking. Just looking for things that look like a regular structure. Can you check to see if there's any questions, comments on the stream?
Well, I've been watching it. So far, no more than we've had already.
Okay. Could zoom into the RAM as well. Might be interesting.
Just to make sure it's really RAM?
Yeah, I might as well.
Yeah? Just don't forget your focus is different than ours, so...
Yeah, I know. It's a little bit hard to see still. Let me see if I can enhance this a bit, though. I think that's actually about as best as it's going to get. Okay, so a little bit hard to see, but there's a relatively complicated structure there that kind of resembles this classic sort of so-called 6T SRAM, where it's kind of like an X-type pattern. Yeah, I would say it's a little bit hard to see with this resolution, but that plausibly looks like SRAM to me. You were expecting SRAM, not DRAM, right?
Yeah, of course. No one's going to bother to refresh.
Yeah.
Okay, now quickly count how many there are here.
Yeah. Okay, let's zoom back out. I'm currently not seeing anything that at least immediately jumps out as ROM. So we can keep going and see if something pops out.
Well, the thing's got to boot somehow.
Yeah, I guess there's a few areas like, so this area like underneath these power buses is still, maybe I should get back out. I don't need this. Some of these power buses are still covering a fair bit of logic, I would say, or whatever that is. it's possible there's something interesting under that. Just a lot of logic cells I see here. Nothing. I guess you in theory could. Would you say it's about 256 bytes is what you're expecting?
Well, I actually don't know the size of boot ROM, but at least that much, yes. Given that the vector table on this thing is about 128, it should be at least twice that. Probably could be more. I don't actually know.
Inside of curiosity, how do you know it's not a state machine?
It's pretty complicated. It drives an actual SPI e-ink device. It has 3 separate SPI EPROMs it stores things in. It's updatable.
So, now I also noticed on these, there are interesting patterns on this RAM. I'm assuming that's just etch defects maybe, or power routing that was on top. But do you see here, if I focus a little better, it is really interesting. I guess this is because there was a power bus running here. You can see how this section looks a little bit different than that section.
Wouldn't that possibly just be the decode logic?
I don't think that's the decode logic. I think the decode, maybe it is. I don't know. I thought the decode logic was more to the right. Because if you look a little bit more, sorry, I should get this back. It's a little harder to see here. Get this back up. I think this is the decode logic here. I almost felt that this was still just normal RAM. It's just this power routing or something was over it, so it etched at a little different rate.
Well, so that's
not confident on that. What else we got? Anything else, or just keep turning the crank and see if we get.
What's going on with those capacitors we saw down below? Did we dissolve the top parts of them yet?
Yeah, actually we've dissolved part of them for sure. Let's focus in on some of them. Our poor little Pricer logo here has been ravaged. It looks like we can see through them now. I wouldn't say, there's anything mind-blowing there. You're seeing kind of the CMP fill or whatever below them now. Or maybe that was, I don't know, that was on top, etch shadow, but they have more texture than they had before in any case. You see that there? Like these? Because this was all smooth before, right? I guess that's below. I'm a little bit surprised. I would have thought fill patterns would have been on top. But maybe they put them in upper layers, because most capacitors are implemented on the active layer, right? Like you theoretically could do a metal capacitor, but I don't think they have nearly the capacitance, right, as one on the active layer. Do you know much about that by chance?
No, the active layer makes sense because you can make a very thin layer of oxide. Making a thinner dielectric would make a higher capacitor value, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Anyways, I would say we just put it back in at this point then, unless you have any specific hopes, dreams, desires.
No, I don't see anything that looks like ROM.
Let's gonna screenshot that real quick. Yeah, so let's go a little bit more and we'll see if we see something, even if it's kind of a toasted ROM on the substrate. Unfortunately, though, we've lost our mounting. Is only one concern here.
Is there more technical wax where that came from?
There is, yeah. It'll just take me a second to do something with that. Usually if I push it down enough, it won't be able to etch under and remove it all. So it's just a little disappointing.
So here, while you're doing that, I can show off the way these things communicate.
Sure.
I have
so stop share here. Okay, you have the bridge.
Cool. So this is actually the code that implements their existing communication protocol for an STM32. So the main sort of communication primitive is this 50 pulses at exactly 1.25 megahertz, which is implemented here. And then the way the actual packets are sent is the packet is, each byte is split into 4 groups of 2 bits. And you send 2 bits at a time by using delays between these pulses. So to begin sending, you'll send a pulse, and then you'll do a delay, and then the next pulse, and so on, and then a pulse at the end. So basically sending 2n bits will require n plus 1 pulses. Pulses are always the same size. The pauses between them are different. And the actual lengths of these, so this is 56 microseconds, and then there are multiples of that, approximately. So basically,
Sorry, is that too loud?
The multiples are approximately, this one should be 2x, this should be 3x, and this one should be 4x, approximately. So that's the actual comms protocol they use to communicate. So 2 bits at a time. So that's the custom logic they implement, since this doesn't really fit into any normal thing that something like SPI could implement. I see there's the suggestion that maybe the capacitors are for voltage conversion that talk on one of those protocols, but unfortunately it does not look like it. The chip itself is powered by CR2032s, these things, a very large number of them. And the the SPI EPROMs are also 3 volts. And the e-ink screen, the interface for it is also 3 volts, and the screen itself generates all the high voltages it needs. And there is nothing else on this board other than those things that I just mentioned. Let me see if I can get this board and I'll show you. Here we go. So this is the actual board, and there are 3 SPI EPROMs here. There's a bunch of passives here for the e-ink display, for which there's a connector here. This is where the chip that we're decapping goes, here. And that's basically it. It's got a oscillator here, this black long thing, and that's it. And then the IR receiver is this black thing here. That's basically it. It's a very Spartan board, so there's nothing here to communicate with that's particularly interesting or requires any particularly strange voltages. Oh, you've mounted it back. Excellent.
Yeah, so instead of waiting for my hot plate to heat up, I just torched the hot plate for accelerated heating, and that seems to have done the job. So, all right, gonna put it back in. All right. I am amazed, by the way, that this live view thing is still working. This camera was so flaky before that it's a miracle that this camera is still working. But
Don't
anyway.
jinx it now.
Yeah, I know. All right. Let's see. All right, so we are etching again. I think I'm tempted to say, just to close things out, I'm just going to let this do a longer etch here and just eat through a bunch of stuff. You know, maybe we'll see the ROM, maybe not, but I think we just need to bring this to conclusion. So maybe I'll let this sit a bit longer, maybe 5 minutes, something like that. Oops. Let's see if I can do that.
I think we've lost the live view.
It's fine. We can also just conclude it here, if that is also a better thing to do.
Well, let's see what the ship's got though.
Let's see. Lost the live view in what respect?
Oh, we used to see a view from you of the chip being etched right now, and now we no longer do.
Oh, sorry. I can get that back up. Yeah, sure. I thought. So let me.
It's a
Sure.
lot more interesting than looking at me being confused by this chip.
Yeah. Just move this out of the way.
Well, there are bubbles coming out the middle now, as you want.
Yeah. So we can just let that sit for a bit. And maybe let that sit for 5 minutes or more. Which I think will get rid of most of stuff.
Yep, it'll leave us with this completely smooth piece of silicon with nothing on it.
Well, I don't know if 5 minutes will do that, but this will take out a lot of stuff.
What are the chemicals now?
This is specifically, this is something called Rustgo, which is basically an over-the-counter, sort of relatively high-strength hydrofluoric acid solution. It's got something like, let's say, 12% hydrofluoric acid, plus some kind of stuff that are related to hydrofluoric acid, which are these bifluorides. I'd call it something like a 15 or 20% hydrofluoric acid solution, depending on how you want to count that.
Wow, I didn't realize they actually sold hydrofluoric acid over the counter. That stuff's like serious neurotoxin and stuff, right?
Yeah, I mean, I've got 48% here as well, if I really want to just use straight stuff. But this stuff I can get, because it's over the counter, sold as kind of a rust remover. It ships basically ORM-D, not hazmat. We were talking about like those hazmat fees. I mean, that's really what eats up the price for a lot of these things. And as a result, then I can get it pretty cheap. But yeah, it comes in these boxes. You can see. It does come labeled as like, fun stuff. It says hydrofluoric acid right on the label there. But yeah, just the way shipping regulations work, this is a lot more cost effective to buy. The other classic that a lot of people use, I also have one here, is you use this Wink rust stain remover. This is much lower, but I think this is a little more pure maybe. But this is, I don't know, depending when you buy it, let's say ballpark 1 to 3% hydrofluoric acid. So a lot weaker, but, arguably safer. Let's call it definitely safer, I guess. The only problem, though, is I've heard that some people get impatient when they use this because it takes a lot longer to dissolve the chip. And it's not uncommon for people to start basically boiling this stuff to speed up the reaction. And I'm not convinced if you're boiling this versus using the other stuff at room temperature, if you're necessarily safer. I can't exactly say what hydrofluoric weak fumes do to you, but it just sounds like something that's probably not terribly good for your health.
Almost certainly not.
It's almost what?
Almost certainly not good for you.
Yeah, even if it's pretty weak like that. So I generally try to tell people don't do that. Just be patient.
So,
maybe it'll take 2 hours, but
if you look, it's interesting. The bubbles are coming off of the area that looked like various power stuff. Nothing coming out of the RAM or the CPU.
Yeah, because it looked like we had etched away most of the metal already from those areas. So just to clarify, I don't think that hydrofluoric acid with silicon dioxide, it doesn't make hydrogen, or I don't know. I don't think it makes as much gas anyways. In practice, I see that gas coming off, from the metal areas where we get those reactions. And that analog area seemed to have maybe thicker oxide or something like that. So I think it's taking a lot longer to etch over there. So we still have a lot more metal that's undissolved over there. If we had done like lapping or something like that, we would have removed it more layer by layer. I don't think we would have gotten this level of unevenness.
But still nothing that looks like ROM.
No, I'm hoping though with this etching that we're going to get a little more clarity on some of the regions like over here, maybe we'll see something that looks a little more promising.
Oh, you think
But
it's going to be somewhere in the CPU area?
Could be where?
You think it's going to be somewhere in the CPU area?
I don't know. I'm still not unconvinced that if this thing was built to a cost and I had JTAG, my JTAG would be able to test the RAM, and I would just be able to use JTAG to just load in any code, and I wouldn't need a boot ROM.
But if I power one of these off and then power it back on, it indeed blinks out patterns out the LED.
Oh, it did. Oh, yeah.
So it's got something running in it.
But that could still just be a really dumb state machine, right? It wouldn't take too much to do that.
In theory, yes, but why would you have a state machine to do that then? I think it's actually communication. And then that also would explain two separate sets of pins that go to the same thing. One for development, one for factory.
Yeah, but if the logic is really simple, you could do it with a state machine. How complicated is this protocol?
The one that they receive is pretty complex.
Okay.
There's optional compression and stuff like that.
I see.
And then devices have IDs, and you can assign IDs and reassign IDs. You can do broadcasts and groups. It's pretty complicated protocol. I don't think it's a state machine sort of thing you'd want to do with.
I see.
It's certainly a CPU, just don't know which.
Did you by chance time it? I should have set a watch or something when we started this etch step.
No, but we do have a YouTube stream and we can just backtrack and see.
Yeah, if you're able to check that, sure.
About 7 minutes looks like.
Okay, that's not a terrible length of time. Let's take a look at it.
All right, 8.
Yeah, I think that's a good length.
It looks like we're having less bubbles now.
Yeah, and ideally maybe I should do a step to etch the metal out, but let's just take a look at it first. Machine is being grumpy. All right, let's switch over to here. Yeah, let's do overview maybe first. What do we got? All right. The RAM has definitely been cleaned up quite a bit. We can see most. Yeah, maybe I could focus this on you. Straighten this out. Kind of. Oops. Yeah. I don't know, somewhere around there anyways. All right, you can see the RAM has been eaten away quite a bit more. And remember I was saying that I thought that, I think some of this area looked like maybe it was just regular RAM to me. It looks a little more even. I still think we have some oxide here that hasn't been etched off yet, which is why we have this darker pattern. This looks like decoding circuitry down here. And these are the standard cells from earlier. Let's move to that area a bit more. Looks pretty much just like random logic to me. But look at the lower left there. See that?
Yeah.
That looks promising. Let's take a closer look at those, because one of those could be wrong. So I'm going to bring it up on mine first just to get a little closer view. Those look maybe like more RAM to me, so I'll see if I can do that.
Oh, that is good focus.
Yeah, not let's go higher magnification though, because it's still pretty hard to tell what's going on there. It's interesting. Now, it's not out of the question that they would have several RAM buffers on here, right? Because they have firmware, but they also might need a CPU cache or something like that, right?
Registers, maybe. I don't know about
Yeah,
cache. It's probably sort of a small CPU.
Yeah, I think these look like they're just RAM buffers of some sort to me. I don't feel like one of these immediately looks like, oh, wait. I might have found the ROM. This looks like possibly like a ROM to me. So that does not look like our SRAM.
But it is a repeating structure, yeah.
It's a repeating structure. It's similar to what I've seen for like a NOR ROM. This is interesting. Let's zoom out and let's get a better context for where that structure is. That's interesting. Wait, so that's very similar to the one above it, though. I didn't think the one above it looked like. Maybe it is just. Oh wait, there's different types of memory here. Okay, sorry, I hadn't looked at this close enough. So let's put these two next to each other. So I think I was just looking too quickly. Actually, the texture of these, I mean, it's a little bit hard to tell on here. Maybe if I zoom in more. It's a little hard to tell, but you can see there's a different texture to this one than there is to this one. So these are actually two completely different memory technologies. I think based on this looks like 6T SRAM, and my quick guess is this looks like some sort of NOR layout memory. I'm assuming some sort of ROM, whether that be implant or contact. Unfortunately, it's a little bit degraded right now, so it's a little hard to tell with the technology, but I think this bank down here is the boot ROM. It looks like we have two banks, or I don't should say two banks, but like there's
two pieces of it.
It's kind of an odd pattern. I don't know how to describe it. Let me get in focus and we'll zoom back out. Because it's not very symmetrical, I guess is the way to put it. Let's go to 25%. It's kind of weird, right? Because this section here, like, oh, I guess maybe it's half here, half here, half here. I guess that makes sense. Yeah. So this controls like half of this and half of this. This controls half of this, half of this. But then that means that there's like one controller here. So there's like 1, 2 in the center, 3 over here. This one doesn't look like this one. It's not very symmetrical. But with this 10-bit thing, maybe that's kind of related to that. Do you kind of get what I'm saying? Like it's not very regular, like normally what I would expect for something like this. So that's a bit odd.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They do look like they're 8 wide though. That's right. So there was a comment here in the video that they look like 8 wide, and they do. If you look, the whole thing is separated into rows, and there are exactly 8 rows.
Yeah, that's true. So byte wide access, and maybe they just needed a weird number of bytes or whatever, right? Because if they were area constrained, maybe they sized it appropriately. I still don't understand though what's going on with this block versus this block though. I still think that's a bit odd.
So this is. Let me see if I can match this to the part in the initial image you sent me. I want to see under what this was.
Sure. Do you want me to zoom out?
Yeah, just for a moment.
Yeah.
Just want to orient to where this is. So it's the corner right above the RAM?
No, this is like the analog block, I think, to the left.
Oh, it's under the two big power rails we had to pin 1 and 2. under those?
So this is here. I'll just bring it up maybe. Can. This is this.
Oh, I see. So it was there all along, just hidden by this metal
Yeah,
stuff.
so you can see this block, for example, is this block here.
Yeah.
It's just hard to see. I think this is the boot ROM here. So this is what I'm going to suggest. I suggest that I try just finishing off the delayer here. I don't, if it was a contact program, for example, unfortunately, I think we've already destroyed that information if it was there. If it happens to be an implant base, though, I can still try to develop the bits out of it. So what I would suggest is we go a little bit further. We just do a little bit more delayering. I'll try to do a live staining demo, and there's a small chance we'll see some bits pop up. If that sounds good to you, why don't we give that a try?
That sounds great.
Okay. And the other thing I'll say is, even if we don't get a good quality stain, if we're able to show the existence that is the ROM, I think that would be pretty valuable.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to put this back over here. This is going back in the etch chamber. Get that back up. Anyways. Okay. I'm going to fill this with HF. And we'll just let that sit for a little bit. Ideally, we probably should have more aggressively etched out the metal, but I think for this test, this is fine. Because this is where the point where, like, especially if it is an implant, the metal will have some pretty adverse effects on an implant ROM. But we also don't see a lot of bubbles at this point, so I guess most of the metal's gone. Just check to see if there are any YouTube comments.
I've been following them.
Okay. I don't know. It's not refreshing.
No, the page has to be refreshed occasionally. YouTube Live is not wonderful sometimes.
Oh, okay.
This current view with the current lighting really shows off the location of the ROM very well. It jumps out at you.
Well, right, but we've also removed so much detail on the chip that it's a lot easier to see now. So let's talk about it. So just to refresh then, this down here we think is the main RAM, which I guess is used for storing the program, the main program, as well as I guess just general memory buffers, right? This is the logic over here. So these are so-called standard cells. We believe these are a few just general purpose internal buffers of some sort, maybe CPU cache, something like that. Looks like there's a couple of them. Maybe a buffer for the protocol, who knows? We believe this is the boot ROM right here. This is miscellaneous analog circuitry. I don't know if we've looked specifically to see what these are, or this is right here.
If this was a CPU core, an 8051, it would make sense. You have an internal memory and external memory. And internal memory would be 56 bytes, and the external would be all that, up to 64K.
That's like 8052? I don't know.
No, 8051.
Okay. What didn't 8052 add like double the RAM to like 256 or something? Or my?
Oh yeah, but I mean in general we have internal memory, which would be small, and external memory, which would be further out and larger. So it is.
I see.
That's what I would have guessed. Oh, you have a question on YouTube as to what is an implant ROM?
Oh, what is an implant ROM? There are different ways to hard code bits onto a chip. And one of them is basically to make, I probably should find a diagram for this to make this a little easier, but basically either make a transistor either working or permanently disabled, and then you try to turn on that transistor. And whether that transistor is able to turn on or not determines whether it's a 1 or a 0. And this was a dominant ROM technology for a while. And the way that you basically do this is you make a normal transistor, and then you shoot some additional doping at it, implanting, by shooting ions. And that raises the so-called threshold voltage of the transistor to a point where it's basically broken at some point or something like that. And so by specially applying that to some of the transistors but not others, you can kind of make a transistor array that forms a ROM. Hopefully that at least gives you a rough idea. I think since we're stopping for a second here, though, I actually could just bring up something a little more detailed. Oops, maybe I should keep sharing, actually. Let me do that. So Sergey, I can't pronounce his name, I'm sorry. Anyways, he has some excellent photos, which I have on here. I could reference one. Here is... Yeah, so here's an example of what this might look like if you had like a CAD tool up or something like that. That's kind of hard to see. So here's a schematic on the left. So start with this. These are basically pull-up resistors over here. Just trust me, we don't have to go into details about why these are, but this is a pull-up resistor. And then you can see there's kind of some transistors here and some not. The idea is when this word line is activated, if you were to energize this, so these are pull-ups, so this would be like, say, 1, 1, 1, 1 across these, except when I activate this, there's a transistor here, which pulls this line down to 0. So you get 1, 1, 1, 0 coming out of here. Similarly, if we activated this word line instead, what would happen then is we would have a 1 here because this pull-up is connected, but nothing pulling it down. We'd have a 0 because this line had basically been grounded here, and a 0 here because this transistor had been activated, turn this down to 0, and a 1 here because there was nothing pulling this down here. So if that kind of makes sense from a schematic perspective, one way to physically implement that is you can have a so-called NOR or a NAND layout. And this is what I would call a NOR layout. And I know people argue about terminologies of NOR versus NAND, but basically know that in this case, NOR kind of means the structure where it's less dense and kind of paired memory is the best way I can describe it. So you can see here, this polysilicon are basically these word lines. So for example, if you wanted to read out, let's see if it's the same memory here. Yeah, same memory basically. So these have been implanted. Remember I said it basically disables the transistors. So these yellow, even though we in theory should have a transistor here because we have polysilicon crossing the active, because we've raised the threshold voltage so much here, the transistor is not even on the schematic anymore here. So this transistor is disabled, this transistor is disabled, this transistor is, but we still have one here. So when we apply a voltage on this word line here, this makes this, this conduct here. And that's going to basically pull the voltage off of the bit line here. And let's say this is ground over here, and ground it out. And that would make this a 0, whereas these lines would remain a 1 over here. And that's based on these, I guess this would be the word lines here going up and down. So I'm sorry, bit lines. So the polysilicon would be the word lines that's selecting which word we want to read out. And then the bit lines going up and down on this metal here. So you can see metal 1 on diffusion. So that's kind of a theoretical background. I will point out though, from my perspective, I actually almost always never care about the physical implementation of these things. Like, it's kind of nice to know, but under most circumstances, all I really care about is, can I differentiate a 1 into 0? And for me, what that means is I'm going to apply a special chemical solution that is going to show the doping. And I want to see a doping difference between, let's call this a 0 here, and a 1 over here. And as long as I can see those doping differences, or 0, 1, whatever we call them, I can differentiate the bits and I can extract a ROM. So what we're going to do after this step then is apply the special chemical solution to see the doping.
What is the special chemical solution? Super secret?
No, it's not secret. The one that I use, there's a few that you can use. The kind of the industry standard, and I don't know, seems to work well enough for me, is something called dash etch. And basically what you're doing is a competing reaction where you're oxidizing silicon with nitric acid, and then you're etching the silicon dioxide with hydrochloric acid. And this etch rate will change depending on the doping concentrations in a very sensitive way. And so if you do this just perfectly, you will see a thin film interference where some of the doping is may show up as like brown, for example, because you'll see kind of oxide over it, and other doping will be clear because you can't really see anything. If you etch it really deep, you'll kind of lose this thin film interference. But if you put it in a confocal microscope or a scanning electron microscope or something like that, you also can see these kind of height differences that you may get from etching one part deeper than the other.
God.
Does that kind of make, yeah. And so part of the art to it is, because you may want to get this thin film and not go into these kind of thicker films or deep etching, there's a little bit of an art form to just creating a quick etch so it's visible under the microscope easily as a thin film. Because if you grow them to be too different, they're no longer thin films to show up nicely under a microscope. Anyways, we've been etching for, I don't know, 8-ish minutes now, I think. I think this is probably a good point to stop. So I'm going to wash this out. Two more. And we're going to put it under the microscope one last time before doing this critical etch step.
So I have a question here on YouTube as well. Why would somebody use an implant ROM over a mask ROM?
An implant ROM is a form of mask ROM. It is one particular implementation of mask ROM. So you could make a mask ROM out of metal. You could make it out of normal transistors. You could make it out of polysilicon. It's just one particular type of mask ROM. You would use implants, though, for example, because at least at a time, they were a way to make very dense ROMs, and also because it's relatively hard to read them. You have to do the special processing. Some people also consider them good for anti-reverse engineering. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yes, it also leaves me unsurprised that these guys would do it.
All right. So that looks about the same there. What else we got? Zoom into these bits, maybe. We want this to look relatively clean before we attempt etching on it. If it still has oxide on it, I would strongly recommend that we hold off a bit. And unfortunately, I think I still see that we still have a lot of junk on there. We could try some things to accelerate this, but if it still has all that stuff, it'll probably give a pretty poor result if we try to stain it now. And this is one of the unfortunate things. Sometimes there's a bit of a waiting game here. You can try to do things like wiping it or ultrasound it to try to get stuff off quicker. Barrier etching, but I think it basically just needs more time right now. Oops.
So should we adjourn to a next day? You can leave it overnight etching, or is it going to die if you leave it overnight?
I think what I would do is, just because it'll take a little bit to do this, maybe we just end the stream and I'll just post the results online afterwards, because this just takes a while and it's probably not that exciting. Although the actual implant staining bit is a bit exciting.
It's exciting for me.
Yeah, but I do think that we're probably going to be looking at another 20 minutes or so to prepare this to have a proper stain. So what we could do is I could prepare it, and then we could do a short live stream where I try to do the actual staining live, and maybe that would be a better use of time.
Let's do that. It could be interesting. I'd like to see it at least.
Yeah. Okay, so let's end it here then, and I will clean this up. And yeah, unless there are any last questions, then we'll cut the stream here, and then we'll figure out when we're going to do the last little bit after I finish the sample preparation. That'll give me some time also to image it, because it would also be fun to get a before and after stain image, because it also will drastically change the dye, even though I might only do this for like 10 seconds of chemicals on it.
That's very interesting. Yes, thank you.
Right. Let me just check real quick to see if there's any last questions on YouTube before cutting it off. Mike Brown just says, I've got nothing better to do.
Well, he can rejoin part two as well.
All right, sounds good. Well, thank you very much, everyone. I think we'll stop here then and see